Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book 2, Night 15 of the Orphan Tales Live reading series. It's an amazing episode because I finished my book. I'm so excited. I cannot believe that I finished this thing that I've been working on for so many, it is years, I guess. I started it right before I got pregnant, and like that whole thing put everything on hold, and so it really did take me 2 years to write one book. I wrote other things in there, but it's ridiculous. It never takes me that long to write a book. So it's been this huge thing hanging over my head and making me feel like I couldn't move on to any other projects or anything. So it's actually a way bigger deal than finishing a book is normally. So I'm very excited. I got myself champagne. Life can go on. I feel like I'm graduating to whatever my life is going to be post having a kid. We are listening to S.J. Tucker and her wonderful album Sorrow and Solace, which is based on the second book of the Orphan's Tales. I'm so sorry that I missed all that time. We missed 2 episodes, but I was just working so hard on the book, and I was so out of it and not in this world, and had drunk too many Red Bulls, so you really didn't want to hear any reading from me. Kat on Red Bulls is nobody's friend, least of all her own. So yeah, what will happen tonight? The one detail I do remember about what we're going to read tonight, I was flipping through and I was like, oh, it's the giant one. So I remember nothing about what happens in that story, but I do remember that it's based on Lucius Shepard's hands. I was doing a reading at KGB when I was writing this book, and the other author was Lucius Shepard, and he's amazing. For those of you who have never read his work, you really should. My favorite of his is a novella called The Dog-Eared Paperback of My Life. It's amazing, it's so good. Anyway, so he's a legend, and I was watching him. I was sitting right next to the podium where he was reading, and he just has had these huge, gnarled, very dry, not a lotion fan, hands, and he was like cradling his manuscript in these sort of laced together enormous hands that look like the surface of a stone because they hadn't been moisturized in so long. And I made a note for the story that I'm going to read tonight right then and there. So if I remember nothing about the plot, I do remember that this story is based on Lucius Shepard's hands. So let me do my intro and we'll get right into it. You can get the music we just listened to and other music based on this book at sjtucker.com. You can get copies of these books at your local independent bookseller's web portal. Please use that rather than the big box stores. If you'd like to patronize my local independent bookstore, it is printbookstore.com. You can find me on Twitter at Kat Valenti. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Kat Valenti. And because I've been working on the book so hard this month, it is the week of rewards. There will be rewards every day this week. So it's a great week to subscribe. And annual subscriptions are a thing now, so there's information there on that. You can catch up in the archive at Kat Valenti Live on YouTube. You can ask me questions, including further details about Lucius Shepard's hands. There really aren't any after the reading's over, but try to think of them while I'm reading, and we won't have any uncomfortable dead air. The lipstick tonight is Bite Mulled Maple. But it has a Lime Crime Diamond Crushers schemed over it. And as always, if you would like to support these readings and my other work and help this household through what is still I know it may not seem like it, still quarantine, still lockdown, still very, very difficult time for freelancers. There's a tip jar on my website, which is katherinemvalenti.com, on my Instagram profile, and on my YouTube profile. So these are all free. They're always free. But if you'd like to toss a coin to your witch, she would be deeply grateful. Thank you so much to Agnes, who tipped me last week. Girl, you are amazing. You are so supportive. I just cannot say how much I appreciate it. And I wish you all the best. Anyone who does, I will thank you on the next stream. All right, let me moisten my throat, and we'll get into it. We are on page 269, if you're following along at home. The tale of the cage of ivory and the cage of iron continued. I blinked at the king and queen, who peered at me like teachers saddled with a particularly dense student. I understand, I said. I suppose a queen must be ready to hear a great many things she would rather not. Quite, Kohinoor snorted. They showed me through the Alcazar of Embers with a brisk efficiency, eager to leave me alone. Finally, we came to a small room full of statues in every imaginable stone, from lapis to tourmaline. I gaped. I did not know what to say. There were hundreds upon hundreds, each of them draped in glittering shawls and intricately carved with faces, men and women, human and otherwise, Jinn and else, each different from the other as a rose from a turtle. What are these marvelous things? I cried. The Hearth King snickered a little. These are your wives, he said. Kohinoor rolled her eyes. Don't be a child, Camille. In the years after Koshkosh perished, the 6 monarchs looked to other races to learn the shape of a reign. Human kings had many wives. Why should we not? Are we not greater and wiser and lovelier than men? Yet it had also been long decided by worried priests that no king or queen of the Jinn should ever be allowed to marry or have children, for the lineage, as you well know, is not counted from parent to child. And should we bear children like an apple tree bears apples, surely some one of us should be tempted to wrest the throne for their little ones. Thus this rather pretty compromise was reached. We commissioned their carving long ago, and they are passed from monarch to monarch, both queen and king, for if humans count their power with wives, should any queen of ours be counted less? We have the most delicate, pliant, and quiet wives in the world, more beautiful than flesh and easier to transport, and more than any human ruler could dream of. She sniffed. We treat our stone wives with much more care than they treat their warm ones anyway. I personally dust mine once a week, and I know Camille gives them presents when I'm not looking. These are yours. They are in your care, and you must be faithful. With that, they left me alone in my bedchamber, braziers of white-hot coals casting shadows on my hands. I crawled onto my bed and listened to the breeze through the arched window, trying not to feel hundreds of stone eyes upon me as I slept. I was queen for 1 day before I was asked to lead an army. The Hearth King sailed into my Alcazar at first light, his smoke trailing behind him like a cape. It has been decided, he announced. We are headed across the 9 deserts to Ajanab, and woe to them when we arrive. I poured my hair into my baskets and tried to clear my eyes to be ready for my first day as queen. What? I put on my best impervious tone. Why was I not told? Why must we go to Ajanab? Well, because of the war, of course. We are at war with Ajanab. Not yet. But when we arrive, we certainly shall be. I clutched my head. But why? What have they done to us? Camille smiled, his dark features rippling, streaks of fire playing under his skin. You must understand, my newest sister, that Ajanab is a dead city. The spice fields died, and it is easy fruit. Only a few folk even remain within its walls, and it is a lovely city with a seaport and a river and any number of useful things. We will make it magnificent again with only a few short and graceful battles. But it's so far away. What use is it as a colony? Camille's smile faltered slightly, his flames flaring white. There is also the matter of a holy object which lies there, which they refuse to give up to us, as we have politely and often asked. Now that the city is dead, there is no reason not to root through the corpse for our property. What is it? It's none of your concern, said Kohinoor, her voice deep and rolling, echoing in my hall like a golden ball tossed from wall to wall. You are too new to understand, and besides, it is hardly necessary that you know every little part of our minds. The 5 of us will look after you, never fear, and wait until you see the army we have assembled. I was nervous to put on the general's sword so soon after my ember crown, but I could not show them. Where's the army, then? On the boulevard, in the square. I should like to inspect the troops. The king and queen laughed, their expressions delighted and cruel, like children who have played an especially good joke. They are on the field already, little firefly. Our wish has been approved by the Kygel, and when the others have arrived, we shall wish ourselves into their midst, and woe betide the Ajahn gate. The other 3 monarchs swept into my alcazar before I could draw myself up to my full height and demand an explanation. The Tinder Queen with her long, high-collared orange robes, modest to the last, the Kindling King with his belt of driftwood, and the King of flint and steel, his endless beard tucked into a golden pouch at his waist. Behind them, like ghostly winds, the 6 priests of the Kygel blew in, holding in their hands a fiery book whose pages were pure white smoke. Their own smoke was equally blanched, and I did not like the look of it at all. These were men who determined the way of wishing among us, for not a djinn in the world could wish a thing which Koshkosh had not himself wished. This is hubris, which would bring his wrath upon us. In their books, every wish the famous djinn had ever committed or granted. They were consulted whenever a wish was desired, be it for peasant or lord, woman or djinn. I do not know of any case of a shade's wrath descending, but the wrath of the Kygel is terrible, and their hearts toll like bells when a wish not in their books is uttered. Their punishments are fell and feared, and there is no dark corner where a djinn might utter a wish that they do not countenance, where they will not hear it. They must not know the truth of Koshkosh, I thought. They must believe it all, or else they would wish for whatever they liked, and who could stop them? It has been determined, droned the head priest in a bored tone, that our Lord Koshkosh many times wished himself on the field of battle before hostilities began in order to stymie his enemies. Therefore you may wish in his shadow and his stead. The new wish was recorded in a different book, old and dusty, with wooden boards and lazily cut pages. It did not flame, even a little. The kings and queens of Kosh gripped my hands, and before I could blink, we stood upon a wide red plain before a city whose walls were so tall clouds wisped at their heights. I had never seen such an army. My flames caught in my throat, banked in wonder. Every soldier, if they could be called such, was armored in fabulous metals that glinted in the bloody sun. Their shoulder plates were flared and fluted, edged in antlers and diamonds, their helmets topped with feathers from birds I could not begin to name. They sat astride war chargers whose chests bulged like boulders, and carried swords that no doubt had endless lineages and cost more than whole towns. The supply carts and pages stretched off in the distance, including 6 vast carriages carrying our wives like cannonballs behind the artillery. Like the audience at a circus, and the hot wind blew back the hair from thousands of craggy, stern, proud faces forged by generations of select nobles courting their select cousins. In the Bay of Ajahn floated dozens of long black ships, and on the beach were dragged dozens more. Campfires glittered on the floor of the plain, which spread out below the high hill of Ajahn like a woman's scarlet skirt. We have had to call in every wish we have ever granted to gather them, Kohinoor said, her own face set to the wind, the smoke of her hair billowing gray and black. An army of kings and queens, not a pauper in the lot. They owe us, or their father owes us, or their grandmother. Their aunt became eternally young. Their foster mother promised her firstborn to pay for the life of her lover. And now they are all here, paying their debt as good breeding will, and never has an army of more beauty been assembled. Some of them are unused to battle, having sat upon cushions and not upon horses, but they have the finest military minds in the world, and they will find a crack in those walls for us. Please, Your Majesty, I said, tell me what we seek in this place. Kohinoor rolled her eyes. It is a box of carnelian, and in it is a thing which is mine and no other's, which they have no right to keep from me. More than that I will not share with a young upstart with no military experience. Matters of state, you know. Suffice it that we wish to have it. The priests of Koshkosh have determined that it is not righteous that we simply wish it out of its hiding place, for what fool hid a thing from the fire tyrant? What? Fear not. The city is so weak you will doubtless hardly know the battle has begun before it is over. Sit back, drink your brandy, and enjoy the sun. She passed me a vial of brown liquor, and I sniffed at it but did not drink. Instead, I drifted down from our little cliff and through the ranks, where the kings and queens of unpronounceable places groused about their conscription and cursed the djinn under their breath, or bragged about how much better they would prove at killing than their layabout knights had done. I trailed my smoke behind me and let them choke on it. Why should I be kept out of their counsels, kept ignorant of their ridiculous box? Was I not queen as well as they? So far my throne had gotten me little but a vast empty house and a closet full of stone wives. The sky was growing dim as I approached the massive gate of Agenab. The stone of it was red as a girl's hair, red as my own ribs, and as blemishless as any wall I have ever seen. I wondered if Kohinoor had examined it this closely enough to see that it was not easily broached, close enough to see that the gate itself was a huge pair of arms crossed over each other, with a worn and weathered face frowning down at the adorned throng. "Go away," the face said. I saw what she did not. This was no gate at all anymore, just this gargantua whose shoulders spanned the breadth of what was once the gate. His belt grazed the rocky earth. His eyes were old and cracked at the edges, bronze green, his brow beaten leather, his jowls deeply stained with wind and sun, his great arms and hands the red rock of wall, huge and dry and barnacled, a petrified giant. Moss grew on his knuckles, birds nested in his ears. His voice was slow and slurry as old snow. "I'm sure you think I am impressed with your brigade of strutting swans. I have been here since the pepper plants were taller than stallions in the fields. You will not chisel one flake of stone from me." He glared at me and tightened his arms. "Who are you?" I gasped. He seemed to consider a moment. "I am the guardian of the gate. I had a name once, but it is no use to call me by it. I am Agenab. I surround it and contain it and feel its barges on my back, and so I have become it. It is better to call me Agenab than to guess at what my name might have been before I laid down my limbs around this place." The tale of the giant who stayed. Once, Agenab had sad and crumbled walls with a gate like a crease in a cheap linen curtain. When I came to work the fields, as my folk often did during the harvest season. The pay is steady, and my shoulders bear those tiny yokes far better than the poor, feeble horses. Why, I hardly feel it. The streets just began somewhere in the middle of this rocky red plain, and sooner or later, if you followed them, you came to the spice plantations and then to the city proper. Lawlessness doesn't mean there's no law, you know. It just means there are a lot of different laws slugging it out in the streets, and none of them have come out on top yet. Anyone can dole out stocks and nails and the right tap in the gut for infractions of whatever law they take a fancy to. Even ones you never heard anything about, so just learn to watch yourself. Agenab was lawless then, which is as good as a wall twice my size. And so I worked in the red pepper fields and the black pepper fields, the green peppers and the pink, and the cinnamon groves and the coriander fields, and the saffron fields and the cumin farms, on the salt flats combing and drying the crystals like hard cutting snow. I pruned and tended the mustard plants, the paprika bushes, cut vanilla beans from the vine. I crushed them all endlessly with my feet in a mortar the size of a galleon. I was happy with my work. Then, Agenab smelled so rich and sweet and smoky, all her spices puffing from one window or another as they were rendered, pulverized, and mixed. During the long, warm harvest, when the sun turned the bay into a great glittering mirror, I pulled spices from the earth, for who does not want their food well flavored? And during the spring, I put my back to the plow and drew furrows deep as a man's legs in the rich soil. But soil does not stay rich. Who can say why land which gives and gives like a mother with endless sweets in her skirts one day shakes her finger at her babes and denies them? In my own country, we are so careful. We plant only every other season. We are so large that we digest but slowly and need only to feast like bears through the summer long every second year. But those feasts, a whale would be embarrassed by our plenty. Goblets bigger than camels' humps, plates the size of shields. But in Agenab they were not so careful, and greedily ground into powder everything the earth could throw up, until she put her hands on her aproned hips and shook her head sadly. "No more," she sighed, "no more." And there was no more. But such things do not happen all at once. For a long while no one noticed, and the sacks of saffron went out into the world as they had always done. I kept at the plough, even though my heart told me to rest, for there was no use in it. But I loved Agenab by then. Roving laws, stolen coins, spice, smog, and all. I would not leave her, but slowly, in clutches, like wild rabbits, the Ajans began to go. Carrying bags on their backs, they went across the plains with squinting eyes, or to the harbor with rum flasks at their hips and oranges to hold against the rotting of their teeth. The bargers went first, since moving downstream for them is as easy as eating. Then the other giants went, following the promise of better fields in the east, where they could pull up strawberries and turnips like red and white bouquets. They begged me to go with them. "The feast is almost here," they cried. "Where will you find enough mule meat and coconut wine to satisfy you?" "Agenab will provide for me, and I will sup as well as you," I said. Well, I did not sup nearly so well as they, and I cracked my own coconuts down by the bayside and drank the raw and unfermented milk. It did not really compare. But I did find a mule to roast, left behind by one of the sea-bound families, and I sat on the beach with my driftwood fire snapping like a house cat and gnawed my mule bones and sucked my coconuts dry, and it was not too wretched, really. At least I could still smell that sweet smoky air, the cumin and the turmeric, wafting over the broken walls. Once, while I plowed near a dead field, I saw a couple clutching a little girl in their arms, and her hardly old enough to walk. Simeon, they hailed me, for everyone knew me by that name, the giant who stayed. "Hello, small folk," I said warmly, and squatted down so they would not have to crane their necks so much. "We are bound for Muran, where the whale fur thatches the roofs, and the roads are paved with mother of pearl." Their girl giggled and reached up to me. I gave her my pinky to hold, as big in her arms as the trunk of a tree her own age. "I wish you well of it," I said. "This place is dead. There is nothing for us now. Our pepper plants withered and died, and there are no corns for our little girl to grind when she is grown. She will spear seals and narwhal instead, and sleep in a bed made of their spiraling horns. We will bounce our grandchildren on knees chilled by snow and sea. Won't that be something?" I smiled at them. Agenab was so warm and wet, it tended to make one forget what snow was. I only dimly remembered breaking through the frost with a shovel to get at the bulbs back home. They walked off, down toward the harbor where the ships bellied up to the dock every day, and left the city that loved them. Sometimes I imagined I could hear Agenab weeping, a poor lady distraught that her babies abandoned her when she grew old and dry. Finally, I put my plow aside and sat on my last field, knees drawn up to my chest, looking at the city. There were no lights in the houses piled up like red beehives, no sound of laws being worked out in the streets. No bells told the hours, there being no one to ring them. My city was empty, and so I decided that no one should really mind if I were to take up my residence there. No one could tell me I was too big anymore. I would sleep under a blanket of spice smog, as I had once or twice dreamed, snoring after the giant feasts of home. I stepped over the rotted gate, long since claimed by mold and sea air, and into the steep hills and alley dells of a city which was built up and up, with streets that jackknifed sharply down and diagonal and straight up in any way they pleased, the cobbles being as lawless as anything else in Agenab. I walked with my hands in my pockets, sniffing the air, still delicious and dark as ever, save that the sour smell of people had gone, and left only the spices to scent the night. I grinned, my big teeth like a moon above the city. I tried not to step on anything that wasn't meant to be stepped on, but I had to squeeze sometimes. I thought, again, that I could hear my girl, my city, weeping, lost and lonely. "I'm still here, my lady," I whispered. But there was something. There was a sound. It wasn't my fool head playing games as it does when the plowing is boring and the sun is high. It was high and piercing and sad as anything, like a voice, but not a voice. I had never heard anything so beautiful in all my days, and the giantesses can play the bassoon like nothing you've known when the mules are fat and the coconut wine has a good head on it. I followed the sound, careful not to crush anything too much, up and down the weird maze of streets that makes Agenab seem all alley, and finally to the center of the city, a little courtyard all humped up in the middle, with a fountain that has green water shooting shooting about like vines, and all manner of vines shooting about like water. It's got a little figure in the center of it too, which I think is supposed to be the cinnamon star, all cavorting in the stream, but her eyes fell out a long time ago, and her knees aren't so good, and I could never tell if she's got the bark of plenty in her hands or some old toys the children stuck in there when they got bored with them. In front of the fountain was a lady, and I was 6 kinds of shamed to see I was wrong, and 10 kinds of tickled that I wasn't the only one who stayed. But she wasn't like any lady I'd seen before. She had a red dress on, not much more than a slip, and she was dancing. But that wasn't too odd. Agenat was never poor of dancers or singers of that sort. It was her hands, her hands and her hair, but without the hands, the hair wouldn't have struck me. She had no fingers at all, but violin bows, fiddle bows, strapped on where her fingers ought to be, and the strips of leather went all around her forearms and up to her shoulders, to keep the bows on tight. Her black hair was stiff as catgut, and she danced so quick and light it flew out in all directions, long and wide enough that I swear to you that woman was playing her own hair with each hand, 5 bows together, whipping her head from side to side to change the length like a fiddler presses on his frets. With bare feet she slapped the cobbles, her toes all bound in copper rings, and the sound of her playing was the sound I had heard, swift and terrible and lovely. When she stopped her scales for a moment to oil the bows, I cleared my throat. I thought you had all gone. The woman looked up, her eyes green as palm leaves under the ecstatic shocks of hair. Not all, she said mischievously. Some of us will never go. I looked at the beehive houses, and indeed some of those round windows' faces peeked out, looking for the violin girl, wondering why she had stopped her song. My name is Agrafena, she said, and put her bows very gingerly into my great hand. I am the song of Agenat. I am staying, and so are they. But who are they? The woman spun around on one heel, sending her hair flying again. We are those that loved this place, loved it enough to hold her hand through death and watch her come out the other side. We stayed to record her dying each in our way, painters and poets and calligraphers, singers and dancers and violinists, sculptors and acrobats, jewelers and jugglers, glass blowers, pantomimes, orators and toy makers, novelists and layers of mosaics, mask makers and players of scenes. We stayed. We wrote and painted and chiseled and sang her death, and we have found, now that the crowds have gone, that like a fallen tree she has enough for us. We mushrooms and mosses. We spiders and glowworms. The dancers tamp down the seeds in our little city gardens, and there are carrots and blackberries enough to feed us. The lion tamers find little clutches of cattle preposterously easy work, and there is meat enough to fill us. We take empty houses and apartments, parlors and sitting rooms, and these are more than enough. There are few locks in Agenat these days. An empty city is a paradise, and here all the straights now end. There's even a winemaker who stayed to press out the last vintage, the famed cardamom wine, which is now ours alone to savor. I hung my head. Then I am sad, Agrafena, for I stayed, and yet I know no art but the pounding of paprika and the cutting of vanilla beans. I can give nothing to the new Agenat except my bulk, which is not welcome. She turned her head to one side, as if sizing me for a new pair of shoes. Poor Simeon, our last giant. But if you are willing, and if you love your city, I know a thing you can do which is harder than any of the little acts we perform in her name. The tale of the cage of ivory and the cage of iron continued. She told me, the great gate said pointedly, that now that Agenat had not so many laws prowling her streets and not so much wealth with which to throw on armor when needed, sooner or later folk would come who did not juggle or sing, but carried things bright and sharp, swords and arrows and others besides. He glared at me with brass eyes. She bade me stretch myself as far as I could and lie around my city so she would be safe. I worried about my skin, as surely these sharp things will be flung at me in the hurly-burly, and I should not make a very good wall then. But she calmed me with her sweet bows, and called to her side stonemasons and brass workers and tanners, and directed them to shore me up on all sides with red rock and brass buckles and leather straps, so that I should be a proper gate, and safe withal. I went to the outside of my city, and kissing her topmost turrets, bent back my legs as far as I could, and stretched up through my ribs as tall as I could, until my ankles met and my head cast a shadow on the courtyard, and not a few pelicans dropped fish into the salt sea in surprise at such a sudden mountain in their midst. Then I crossed my arms and closed up the gate of Agenab, which is who I am now, and not Simeon any more. I bit my lip. But if there are only artists inside, they will all be slaughtered. We have an armorer, an old water rat living in a leaky garret with dozens of empty suits lining his wall, but what are dozens to your assembled horde? His smile was hard and cruel. But never you worry about it, you drafty old thing. No sword will pass my fingers, and they will be safe. Agenab will provide for them. I did not want to come, I muttered sullenly. No one asked me. They just whisked me here with a cup of brandy in my hand. That will hardly make us feel better in the end, the gate huffed. I turned the flaming rings on my fingers. Something within me longed to see the corkscrewed streets of Agenab, longed to hear Agrafena's bows slide through her hair. I had been queen only a day and seen nothing at all but my own house. I did not want to put a torch to that place, not then, any more than I wanted to hear that Kashkash was wicked or that I was only queen because of my hair. Suddenly I reached out and clutched the gate's massive stone finger, which was like a long temple pillar in my hands. Let me in, I begged. Let me see the city. Perhaps I can convince them to leave. Perhaps if I can find that ridiculous carnelian box, they will take it and go and be glad to lose no one in the battle. The gate squinted, his brass eyes crusted with verdigris, suspicious. How do I not know you are not intent on some sabotage? You are a djinn. I would sooner trust a starving crocodile who wishes to mind my mule than a djinn. Color and flame flared in my cheeks. How should I trust a giant not to crush me in his fingers because a fly's been buzzing in his ear? I banked my fires. But come, you must see that I am young. I was only made queen yesterday. I know nothing of this place or this war. Let me in. I will try to find what they want and bring it out to them with no bloodshed. If I am lying, I will wish it all back for you and damn the Kaigal. The gate frowned, his mouth lines deep and clogged with clay. I will let you in. For one night. You must be again at my fingertips by dawn, or I will not let you out, and you will discover that actors and singers are often forced into rather more unsavory lines of work, and they are not out of practice. No one who lived in Agenab of old let their muscles soften for even a moment. I nodded furiously. Swear by your wish-wrangling king, swear by Kashkash the Bold and his brazen beard, and I will believe you, he grumbled. I could make that promise, but it would mean nothing to me, not anymore, not now. Slowly I gripped the sides of my silver hip baskets and said, I will swear by him, but also by the cinnamon star and the snake star and the seven sisters. Grudgingly he nodded and lifted his forefinger from his middle finger, exposing just enough space for me to gather my smoke and seep through. Go to the fountain and find Agrafena. She's always there this time of night, fiddling up the moon. She will take you to a room with rafters so high you will think it is open to the night, and an ivory cage, and a flame like your own. I thanked him, and holding my baskets close, drifted through his fingers and into the Red City. And we will pick up there on Sunday night. This book is a little more anti-capitalist than I remember writing. Like, yeah, everybody leaves and there's enough for all. Solving the housing crisis in Midtown Agenab, which is actually in part based on New York. There's a name for a neighborhood later on that if you've ever lived in Inwood or visited there, you may recognize. I'll tell the story when we get there, but there are definitely parts of it that are based on parts of real cities. But yeah, there is a lot more anti-capitalist stuff in the Orphan's Tales than I remember. Not overly surprising, but yeah. Does anyone have any questions? It's okay if you don't. It just means an early ending to the reading. I'll do my outro stuff, and if you have questions, you can just pop them up in the chat. I didn't say it in the beginning. As always, for legal reasons, this has not been an audiobook of the Orphan's Tales. This has been a play. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can get copies of them at your local independent booksellers web portal. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti, on Patreon at Cat Valenti. Great time to subscribe for this week's mini rewards. You can catch up in the archive at Cat Valenti Live. And if you are so moved, you can put a penny in the tip jar, which is on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, and on my website, which is catherinemvalenti.com. These are free, but everything sucks, so anything that you can contribute is deeply appreciated, and I will thank you on the next stream. How's the post-book celebration going, and what did I do to celebrate finishing the book? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I played Final Fantasy VII all day, which I haven't done. I haven't played a video game all day. I mean, Animal Crossing doesn't count, right? But I haven't played like a proper RPG all day for a decade, so it's very exciting. And I ate a bunch of junk food, and I didn't do anything today, which actually caused me a fair amount of anxiety, as I feel like I do have like all this stuff I have to get started on, but I'm forcing myself to take a break. So that felt very weird. Have I ever played an instrument? I have played many crappily. My parents were divorced, so there was who was going to pay for my lessons tended to get shuffled around a lot, and so I never really stayed with anything more than a year. So like I can play the flute a little, I can play the piano a little, I can play the accordion a little, but I suck at all of them. And like not like I'm not being modest. Oh, I suck. Oh, look how brilliant I am. No, I actually suck and can barely do anything. So yeah, it's about that. Yeah, no, I mean I wish that I had learned an instrument. It just didn't work out for me that way. And then I was learning the accordion when I got that horrible carpal tunnel thing. I haven't really been able to play since I don't have the wrist strength. Anybody else? Okay, well, I will see you guys on Sunday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel. I hope that this has helped you guys through quarantine from March to now. It's ridiculous. We've read over 800 pages together and over 5 months. Like, this is pretty epic. I can act. I was in theater from the time I was about 4 years old to about 20, 21. So yes, I can do that thing a little bit. I have a cake question, the pistachio cake, roasted but not salted. I like salt, so I always get the salted kind. But most bakers would say no. But I say yes. I'll see you guys Sunday night. Love you all. Bye.